Hi everybody, welcome to Built to Adapt here at SpringOne Platform 2017. I'm Jeff Kelly, I'm joined by Ciara Byrne. We're here talking to some of the smartest technology leaders and some of the biggest companies in the world about how they're transforming how they build software and how they're transforming their businesses. And we're also talking to some of the smartest industry analysts out there. And today we've got Fintan Ryan from Redmonk joining us.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for coming on. So we've talked in the past, and you're a frequent visitor to SpringOne platform. We did a panel together last year around cloud native data, and I'd love to get your take on that. But first, why don't we start with your take on some of the announcements this morning? PCF 2.0 was announced, which includes Pivotal Container Service. I know you and I were chatting briefly before we went on air about kind of the perception out there, Kubernetes versus PCF. Is it an and/or question? What's your take?
So our take is very much that it's an and. We see the two technologies being quite complementary. It's a question we get asked quite frequently. Is Kubernetes going to displace everything else? And when you kind of look at the technology landscape, there's a spectrum of different solutions. No one size is going to fit all. And I think as we look at the announcement as it was made today and kind of the background work that's been done with Kubo, it's been pretty obvious that you kind of see this as a spectrum as well in terms of what your customers are asking for and what you're delivering. So yeah, we very much view it as an and.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of what you're seeing out there in the Cloud Foundry community, PCAS was actually announced a while back. What is your take on kind of the reaction? Have you gotten some inquiries about that from your customers? What's kind of the feeling out there in terms of actual customers and users on the ground?
There's still a bit of confusion. Like people are trying to figure out, again, back to the spectrum question, they're trying to figure out, okay, which solution should I be choosing for different types of tasks? But among people that are actually using, particularly people that are using Cloud Foundry already, they kind of understand, okay, this is the spectrum of problems that I want to solve here, and this is the type of problems that I need to potentially look at Kubernetes for. So a bit of confusion, but the more experienced users have a good idea of what they actually need to use.
So, right, and I think that's probably something we're seeing industry-wide about when to use which platform, whether that's Pivotal or open source or even other platforms out there. So what's your take on the show itself? I know you were here last year, so this is at least your second time here. What's your take on the vibe? It's about midday through really the first full day. What are your thoughts?
A couple of different factors. One, there's a level of kind of like genuine excitement around Spring, which is quite interesting to watch. Like people are using it for solving real problems, and that's kind of reflected in the conversations that we're having. Like you talk with people, it is very much, this is a real world problem that I have solved with technology X, which is quite interesting. In terms of the show itself, obviously bigger. I love the fact that it's back in San Francisco. That's a big thing. Less trips to Vegas is always a good thing in my mind.
Agree wholeheartedly.
And just, yeah, there's a nice level of energy. It's not overhyped. People are focused. It's pretty clear quite a few people are here to learn, which is always a positive when we come to an event. Like obviously as analysts we go to a variety of events. Sometimes you come across events where people are very much there just for a bit of a jolly, and this is different. There was definitely people that are here to learn.
So I know Redmonk brought out some research recently on which you said indicated that enterprises are really going cloud native really now. So for example, that 71% of Fortune 100 companies are already using containers. So can you tell us a bit more about that and where that's going?
So there's two aspects to that. So first off, there is definitely a big shift and there's a lot of momentum behind it, but it's still early days for a lot of these companies in terms of where they are. We had an analyst session here yesterday with some of Pivotal's customers, and one particular person made a fantastic comment where they said, like 30 years of M&A activity leaves you with a very, very interesting IT landscape. Yeah. So for greenfield work, we definitely see an awful lot of stuff moving towards like definite cloud native, and then we're seeing app modernization efforts, and we're starting to see a little bit of lift and shift stuff happening as well. But yeah, everyone's looking at it. People are gone past the kicking the tires stage, and they're definitely making actual investments. The actual data that you're referring to there, when we looked at it, these are organizations that are actually actively hiring for these skills. So it's no longer like a science project in an advanced research part of the company. It's something that's actually being done. People have put budget behind it. So yeah, people are definitely moving reasonably fast towards adapting these technologies.
You said though that there is a danger that enterprises will view containers as a replacement or an upgrade for virtual machines, which misses the point. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, this is one of my bugbears. The place the place where a VM works and what it actually does is it's a specific subset of technology. Part of the initial conversation about containers was framed about this is a replacement for VMs and it's a cost-cutting exercise. But if you're going to start building VMs and you're essentially going to put your entire operating system image in there and you're going to have all the overhead of managing that in the same way as you had with a VM, you may as well just stay with a VM. You're kind of completely defeating the reason for using it. And we are seeing that pattern quite a lot. Like particularly if you talk with some of the folks that are doing security software around containers, they will tell you that they're frequently coming across people who are using like full Ubuntu images for building a container where they probably could do something with like a 40, 50 meg, very, very small image from something else. So that's one part of it. The other part is you're missing the agility that the containers will actually give you, and that kind of going to that cloud native mindset will give you, because you're still essentially just wrapping up what you were doing before rather than rethinking how you're architecting software.
So apart from this pitfall and the fact that people are mainly doing greenfield projects, like what do you think is missing for people to really adopt this stuff more for core services or in production?
I think there's two aspects. The first and the biggest one is skills. The skills gap is definitely there. Excuse me. Now, on saying that, the skills aspect is something that's kind of becoming commoditized. So like if you look at the announcement of the various container services by the different cloud providers, you look at what's been done here in terms of having like Kubernetes as part of the overall offering. The confusion part of it is getting commoditized, so that removes some of those skill gaps. But there's a bigger question of people actually understanding, okay, how do you actually architect software for a microservices age, for this classic distributed systems problems or the kind of things that people haven't quite got to. That's one aspect. The second aspect is a classic organizational transformation problem. So I think anyone who's here is quite familiar with the fact that the technology is generally the easy part. It's the organizational part is much, much harder.
What in particular are you finding most enterprises struggling with from that organization and people perspective?
I think it's a permission thing. Like giving people permission to fail is quite a big thing, and like there's an awful lot of, away from development, there's an awful lot of kind of like DevOps mindsets that haven't permeated large organizations fully yet. Like the concept of things like blameless postmortems, they said they like the ability to allow people to fail, the rapid iteration, being able to roll things back and move forward. All of those kind of things are things that you need protection from the management structures to actually allow people to do. And that tends to be the biggest hold up. It's just, and you see organizations where they've made an actual decision to move forward and kind of go, okay, we're going to give people a bit of freedom, and we're just going to make sure that, I can use a bad analogy, but we'll give them the shotgun, but we're going to take the 2 cartridges out of it, so they're not actually going to blow the fleet off. That's where that happens. That's quite successful. Where it doesn't happen, you see an initiative started and it just dies, like many IT projects have before.
You've also said that security will be the most significant vector for enterprise sales of cloud native technologies in the medium term. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so there's two or three different major trends that we can run through on that one. The biggest one, so as you can guess by my accent, I'm based in Europe, is GDPR, and what that's actually going to do. So GDPR is a general data protection regulation which has come out of the EU. Now, on a board or strategic level, when you're looking at this could potentially mean a 4% fine of your overall global revenue. Now, when you start rolling that back into your technology organization, then you start understanding, okay, how am I managing personal information? How secure is it? What ways can I improve this? And particularly for new applications where I'm dealing with massive amounts of information, what can I do to consider that? So that's one of the big security vectors. The other big one is just that the threat landscape has changed so much. Like the old model of, we're going to put a kind of a donut around things and everything inside of it we're going to consider safe. That model doesn't work anymore. Like you just have to assume that there's bad actors pretty much everywhere, so you need to make sure you're secure. So when it comes to the cloud native technologies, there's a whole bunch of thought that has been put into building security in from the outset, and not trying to bolt it on at the side. And if you can make that part of the developer's workflow, if you make it part of the operational workflow, that changes and makes things, I guess that kind of makes things much easier in terms of compliance, etc. And with that, you end up in a situation where security becomes an important consideration.
As you can tell, we're here live on the floor, so sorry, continue.
You've also said that one of the problems with this is that developers often view security as an afterthought, at best, or a hindrance to getting stuff out quickly. So, like, how do you change that mindset, and how important is it to do that?
So there's two. I keep going in twos, but there's two different aspects to that as well. One is just a general education thing. Everyone knows security is important, but people kind of are a bit reluctant about doing it. That's one part. The second part is the tooling. And if you just build this into the tooling, that it just happens automatically, then people don't need to think about it. Part of the security problems that you tend to see is that people are told, get it out the door. We'll bypass QA. We'll do whatever has to be done. But if you
make the deadline.
Yeah, to make the deadline, very much so. And if you shift out, if you've done a whole bunch of shift left in terms of your development methodologies, and you start building all of this stuff directly into your release platform and how you're actually designing a product, it just becomes second nature, and then people got to forget about it.
So a lot of that problem will go away, basically, if you have good tooling for this.
I won't say quite go away, but it will get a lot better. I think would be the best
right,
way.
And the idea that actually moving faster is more secure because you're able to stay ahead of some of the threats and react faster, rather than if you're releasing every 6 months and your security is going to be pretty outdated.
Yeah, very much so. Like the quicker you can do it, and it's quite interesting. So like a couple of companies in the space have been talking about various approaches. Like Pivotal, we're talking last year, during SpringOne last year, we're talking about a repaving methodology, basically of kind of like, we'll rebuild everything that's underneath you and you can move things above. We see companies like HashiCorp and people like that talking about this as well. So there's a lot of movement in the space to help people kind of understand, okay, we can create almost this like immutable architectures type approach. We can clear out the underlying security problems by just releasing faster and faster.
Mm-hmm. And that's a real mind shift for a lot of companies, and especially maybe the less technology savvy folks in the business side might not kind of grasp that initially. It seems a little counterintuitive. It's
quite interesting actually. So that's generally always held up as an example, but if you talk with compliance folks and audit folks, if you can show them a repeatable process that they can guarantee you could replicate exactly what state this thing was in, they're really happy with that. You know, and they actually won't hold up a barrier to it. Where they've got a kind of a bad appetite and a low risk profile around this kind of stuff is that they've encountered people saying that they can do this for years and not actually doing it. So there's kind of a balance. So it needs to be provable to them, but if you can show, yes, this is exactly what we're doing, and we can guarantee it anytime, you can query it anytime, and they're quite willing to accept it.
I know another trend that you've written about is this whole outsourcing, I guess, anti-trend. You know, we saw all this outsourcing happen for years, and now we're starting to see software development be brought in-house at a lot of enterprises. And I think we're certainly seeing that among some of the enterprises that are here, recognizing how important it is to own software development as a core competency. Could you talk a little bit about that shift and maybe how it's impacting both enterprises as well as that whole outsourcing industry and how maybe they're adapting a little bit?
Yeah, so if you look at the outsourcing industry, first off, like it's pretty obvious a lot of the folks in that space they're suffering a little bit at the moment. They're trying to reimagine their business models. They're trying to become much more consultative. There's a lot of things that are a lot of external pressures that are kind of coming on them. And part of that was that we over-rotated completely and we outsourced everything. And like we in particular thought developers are not important to our overall organization. Now we've kind of shifted back and people are understanding, okay, there's certain things that are very strategic in terms of where I'm going to bring my business, and there's other things that are incredibly tactical. The issue that we had for a long time was that the strategic and tactical were basically merged together under a big IT bucket and outsourced. So as companies have kind of figured this out, they've gone, okay, if I want to be kind of much more nimble, much more agile, I'm going to have to hire smaller pockets of developers that are given permission to do very, very specific things, but do and release them as quickly as they possibly can. And that brings you around to having to build back up competencies within your organization. The other side of that is that there is still a bunch of stuff that you could outsource and that you no longer need to manage. Like traditionally that would have been a data center. With the move to cloud, that means you're just putting it onto one of the cloud providers. And there's various other services like if an organization is still running their own email server I'm sorry, like that's just not a competency that you need as a company. But you see people still doing that kind of thing. So you see that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff is what's really suited to the outsourcing now. But where that kind of puts pressure, like the really big pressure point that you see with the outsourcing companies then is their traditional model was always like, we'll go in, we'll help you develop it, and then we're going to sustain it for you for the next 8-10 years. Right. And when you take all of that revenue stream out from them, that puts them in a difficult place.
Absolutely. So they're going to have to adjust to this new approach. From a practitioner standpoint or enterprise standpoint, is it a case where you really need to do a kind of a portfolio review of your different applications and make some of those choices about what needs to stay, what can go to an outsourcer, those kinds of things? Yeah,
absolutely. And you need people with the technical competency to actually understand what's important and what's not to your organization as well, and what you really do need to keep in-house. How you go about that, it varies from company to company, but that's definitely what needs to be done. Part of the problem, this is one of the ramifications of the whole outsourcing move as it happened, is that a lot of the people that were very, very good technologists have ended up in these kind of quasi-project manager roles where they're managing a budget towards things, which means their technical skills have been depleted. So you're back to having the problem of there's some training that needs to be done to re-educate people in terms of what they can do and what's possible. So it's a combination of portfolio review and training.
Another trend you've written about recently was cloud-native data science. So can you tell us a bit about what you mean by that and what the impact is on data scientists?
I think I was trying to get as many buzzwords into a sentence as I possibly could. So the dirty little secret of data science is that the data prep, the cleaning, the organizing, all of that kind of work, that's where the bulk of the work actually happens. And it's not actually in where people are developing a model or where people are extracting something useful out of it. What we've seen is a kind of a twofold thing. One is people trying to automate these processes and make them much, much more consistent. But those kind of workloads, they can sometimes be batched, they can sometimes be kind of like quite spiky, etc. So you need to scale up and scale down infrastructure. You need it to be repeatable, but you don't necessarily need it to be on all the time, etc., etc. So there's a whole bunch of the cloud native techniques become very, very applicable to that. So you've seen people kind of creating their own tooling that's enabling these kind of flows and helping them kind of tidy up a bunch of this kind of flow. The other side of it then is when you get to things like the training of machine learning models, and when we go a step further and we take a look at neural networks, etc., how people are actually managing those kind of workloads. So one very interesting example of this is to take a look at the OpenAI Institute and how they actually scale workloads. So they'll go off and people will fiddle around, run some basic models, and then they will scale it out across one or more cloud providers and do the processing of the entire model in a very, very quick fashion, but across a whole set of compute that they never would have had, and then scale it all back down again and try to minimize the cost. So we're seeing that kind of pattern emerge quite a bit, and it's quite an interesting one to look at. And again, as the cloud providers start providing more functionality to enable this, so like the GPU offerings across all of the different cloud providers are now quite mature. You've got the kind of work that people like NVIDIA are doing where they're packaging up an awful lot of the software and frameworks into a manner that's very, very easy for people to use to build on top of it. It's becoming much easier for people to create these kind of cloud native pipelines for their data.
Mm-hmm. And taking that a step further, in terms of data science actually working with developers and building applications that are infused with data science, infused with intelligence. I think we talked about that last year a little bit in our panel. Have you seen any kind of movement in that space? Have we been getting better at that over the last year? Or still a long way to go?
Still a long way to go. We've had some incremental improvements, but there's still a gap. And it's something we've been mulling over about how do you address that, but we definitely don't have a proper answer for that yet.
We don't have an answer yet, we're still working.
If I have an answer for that, I will not be an analyst next year, I'll be doing something else.
Well, I was going to say, we'll have you back next year and we'll see where we are. But unfortunately, we're out of time, but this was a great conversation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the rest of the show, and everybody, thanks for watching.